Hey guys, this is Alex with Excel in You. Today let's talk about data entry and data formatting and set you up for long-term success with your automations.
Excel is set up as a giant grid with a layout of columns that have letters as their header and rows which have numbers as their header. To select a cell, we simply click on any cell of our choice. Cells are defined by their column, then their row, so this would be cell F4. To move between different cells within Excel, I can click on the next cell that I want to work within. I can use my arrow keys up and down, right and left, and I can also use the tab and enter keys. If I hit enter, I'm going to move down one row at a time, staying within the column I started in. If I use tab, the tab key will move me one column to the right, staying in the row that I started in. Now the tab and enter keys work together much like a typewriter. After I've been moving to the right using the tab key several times, I can hit enter. It will take me down one row, but it will bring me back to the same column I started in. This is great for entering repetitive data. For example, if you have name, email, phone number, and you need to do that for multiple people, you can enter one individual's data, name, email, phone number, then hit enter to start in the same spot for the next person. If I need to format cells, I'll need to select one or multiple cells. Let's start by selecting multiple cells that are adjacent to each other. Let's use the click and drag method. I'm going to click on the cell I want to start in and drag in the direction I want to select. So I've selected this range of cells in column I. I can do so in rows as well, selecting this range of cells in row 4. A range is defined by starting in the topmost left cell of my choice and finishing in the bottommost right cell of my choice. So I can drag down at an angle to select a range of cells. And as long as I'm holding on to that mouse click without letting go, I can adjust the range of cells as necessary. Once I let go, I will not be able to adjust this range of cells. I'll have to start anew. You notice I was able to do this in reverse by starting with the bottom right and finishing with the top left. It does work both directions. If I want a little bit more control, or if I need to select a range that's wider or taller than the page itself, I can use the Shift key. The Shift key will be invaluable for selecting cells that are adjacent to each other. I'm going to start my top left cell, hold Shift, and select any other cell to select that range. As long as I'm holding Shift, I can adjust the size of my range to wherever I want. And you'll notice how big and small this square or rectangle becomes depending on the cell that I select. Once I release Shift, I have my selection that I can begin formatting. The great thing about Shift is I can hold Shift again. I'm holding Shift a second time, and I can begin re-editing the range size that I want to work within. If I need to select individual cells or cells outside of this range, meaning non-adjacent cells, I'm going to be using the Control key. The Control key allows me to select one cell, hold Control, and select any other cell. All of these individual cells are all selected simultaneously. Using the drag method, I can select a range of cells, vertical, horizontal, and at an angle. These are all cells that are selected simultaneously even though they are not connected to each other. Sometimes I need to adjust an entire column or an entire row. To do so, I'm going to select the header of that column or row. Selecting L, for example, selects the entire L column. Selecting the number 5 selects the entire number 5 row. I can use Shift and Control with these as well as the drag method. So I can select I through N by dragging. I can select A through Z using Shift. I can select 3, 5, 7, and 9 using Control. These two keys can work in conjunction with each other along with the drag method. I can drag, then I can switch to using Shift to adjust that same range. Then I can switch to using Control to select cells outside of that range. I can go back and I can deselect cells from within the range I previously selected. Note, once I am done using the Shift key, especially in this situation, I might not want to go back to it. If I hold Shift and click on a new cell, I can get some interesting results that include double selecting, and that can cause some interesting errors within Excel. So be mindful of that using Shift after you've already used Control for selecting non-adjacent cells. We're going to start by selecting the cell that we want to enter the data into. From here, we simply start typing. Just like a word processor, we can type letters, we can backspace, type numbers, backspace, and even special characters. There are a couple things that are different than a word processor. We're not going to be able to format text using the same type of indentations, paragraphs, headers, bullet points, things along those lines like we would in a Word document. In addition to that, Excel is constantly looking for the use of formulas or equations. So be very mindful that you're not starting the data within a cell using mathematical symbols, such as the equal sign, plus, even the minus sign or a dash, could be viewed as Excel looking for a formula, which will give you an error message. So do be mindful that if you need to start data with a mathematical symbol, you may want to start with a parentheses or a quotation or even some spaces, and that might help Excel accept data as is, or look for ways to start your data without using a mathematical symbol if possible. Once we have entered the data into Excel, we can always go back to reformat it or edit that data. There are two ways to do so. Number one is I can go to an individual cell and double click on it. When I double click on that cell, I can now see the data within here. I can highlight, I can backspace, I can type in new information. If I don't want to work within the cell itself, it can get a little messy, it auto formats to different sizes, it can be a little bit weird sometimes. So I can also come up here to what's called the formula bar. The formula bar, right here at the top of the page, is where we can see all the data that's already been entered within a cell. As you can see, it's already starting to do some weird formatting things because of previous use of this worksheet. Okay, we'll come back to that wrap text in just a moment. To format the cells that the data is within, we want to look at the cells and that they are housing at that moment. For example, we have email, phone, and notes here that all are housing data that is larger than the cells that are containing the data. You'll notice that email and phone are cut off visually. All the data is there, but it's cut off from our visual sight, which sometimes is not an issue, but other times is an issue if we need to be able to quickly reference that data. Notes is completely visible to the right. It's running over into the columns next to it. That is because there is no data in the columns directly next to the cells housing all of these notes. It does not mean that the cells to the right in columns F and G and H are housing any data yet. All the data is being housed within column E. If I was to add data into column F, you'll notice that instantly the notes column gets cut off because that data is now more important, visually speaking, than what's in column E. You notice that once I used backspace or delete, that text is gone. It comes back to being visual again. So let's format these cells so we can house all the data in one place. I'm going to select column E. That's where my notes are, and that's where the data is running to the right. I'm going to go to the right side of the header of column E, where my cursor becomes a double-sided arrow. I'm going to click and drag. This allows me to manually adjust the width of the cells within column E. All of column E is now as wide as I would like it to be, and I can adjust back to be as narrow as I would like as well. The same thing can be done with rows. I can adjust the height of the row as desired. I can do this for multiple rows simultaneously by selecting 2, 3, or more rows or columns, and then at one point, any point, using that double-sided arrow to adjust that column or row. You'll notice that when I adjusted 1, all of the columns adjusted to the exact same size. That is important to note because sometimes I want all the columns the same size and sometimes I don't. This is a great example because emails, phone numbers, and notes all take a different amount of space. So let's come back to a little bit closer to the original size, and let's look at how to auto-format to the width that will house the data within the cells. I can select one or multiple columns or rows, go to that point where my arrow is double-sided, and double-click. Now the columns or rows are auto-formatted to fit the width or height of the cell that has the most data. So column C is as wide as the largest email. Column D, most or all phone numbers are the same size, so that is a very consistent row. And column E is as wide as the largest note that is written in it. Now, I don't always want my cells to be as wide as the largest data value because sometimes, especially with notes, notes can be very, very long, and I don't want a cell that expands 3 pages to the right. When those kinds of situations happen, I can manually adjust the size of the column, and I still have that problem of the notes running over. So I'm going to fix that by using wrap text. I'm going to select column E. I can also select individual cells or any range of cells I want simultaneously, and click wrap text. Now the cells are auto-formatted so that anything past the width that I have set wraps to one line lower within the cell. You'll notice this cell down here, E5, got a little weird. It's formatting to a point that I can't see the data within it. So I'm going to come over here to the number 5 for row 5, go to the bottom where I would adjust the height of that row, and I'm going to double click. Aha, so I found that there was spacing in here that I didn't originally see. When I created wrap text, it tried to format in a certain way that the cell didn't realize was happening. When I adjusted the height of that row, now I can see all of the data. I can do this to any number of rows, any number of columns simultaneously. I can use wrap text on the entire worksheet if I want to. The nice thing about that is now that wrap text is turned on for the entire worksheet, any cell that I go into where data starts to run past the edge automatically creates new lines. When I hit enter or move into a different cell, that row auto-adjusts to the height necessary. When I hit backspace or delete, it will auto-adjust back to the original size. If for any reason it doesn't, we always go back to our basics of adjusting the height of the row or the width of the column.
More on this topic and others in comments below.
We have 4 new columns in our Excel worksheet: income, date, score, and account number. Each of these columns has data entered in a general format, meaning I just typed in the numbers that I wanted to represent. Let's start with date and look at how Excel auto-formats this information. If I enter a date in a month-day format, it will automatically format as you see here. If I use a month-day-year format, this is how Excel auto-formats that data. For score we're using as a representative of 100%, so we're going to use a decimal point. If I begin data with a decimal point, Excel will auto-format to add a 0 on the front end, so you can visually see that we are less than 1 with this data. For account numbers can start with the number 0, but if I enter 0 into Excel first, Excel removes it. Let's go through and format these cells to better match the column information. Income is currency. So let's right-click on the selected cells, go to Format Cells. Under Category, let's choose Currency. We can adjust the number of decimal places. We can have our dollar symbol automatically added. And we can select how we want negative currency to be shown. When I click OK, we have currency now represented under income. For date, let's get all of our date information formatted in the same way. Format Cells, choose Date as a category, and you can scroll through the type of information you want to represent. I like the standard version, so I'm going to click OK. Now all of my dates are represented in the same format. Score is a representation of 100%, so let's change these decimal points to percentages. Select Format Cells, choose Percentage. Adjust the number of decimal places, and note that any number within your cells will be multiplied by 100 before the decimal point and before the percentage is placed. So all of my decimal points have now become whole numbers with percentages. If I had put 95 and then changed it to a percentage, this would have shown as 9,500%, and I would have had to re-enter the data. If I choose to change this data with any whole number, Excel will auto-format now to the design that I want. Account numbers, as you saw, can start with 0, but Excel auto-removed that 0. This one's a little bit different. Instead of formatting the cell as a number, I'm actually going to format this cell as text. By formatting the cell as text, it will now treat any information entered into the cell as exact information, meaning that if I enter in a 0, it will keep the 0. Now this is a little bit different than the text around it, so it's giving me just a little warning saying, hey, this looks a little different than the text around it. But I don't mind because I want it to represent as a 0. Next, let's talk about making our data a little bit easier to read. We're going to start by adjusting the placement of our information within our cells. We have data here on the left side that is showing on the very bottom of the column. On the right side, because of wrapped text, everything looks to be centered. This can make some cells a little bit harder to read, like you can see here on the bottom, with Jane and Mary sitting right on top of each other with no space in between. To fix this, I'm going to select the cells I want to format, come up to the top, and I have two sets of alignment keys. I have my standard left, center, right, just like in a word processor. But I also have bottom, middle, top. I'm going to choose middle. This brings all the data within the cells up to the middle of the cell. Now I can easily see the spacing between each of my data points within my table. For headers, I generally like to have everything centered. This makes it obvious that this is a different type of information. This is a header and not part of the data set. If I really want my headers to stand out, I'm going to use fill. This is a little bit different than a word processor. I can change the background color of any individual cell I want. So let's choose green. And then just like a word processor, I can change the font color as well. If I want to create a overarching header, or if for any other reason I need to create a larger cell than just one by itself, I can use merge and center. Once I've selected the cells or the range of cells I want to use, I'm going to come up to the top and select merge and center. Now this is one large cell that I can enter in information. Just like a word processor, I can adjust font size, font, boldness, and italices as well. Back to merge and center. I can merge and center a column, a row, and even a range of cells. If there is data represented within any given cell, when I create merge and center on that range of cells, only the top left value will be kept in my merged cell. And Excel does give a warning before merging. Only the upper left value will be kept and the rest will be discarded. It will be deleted and gone. So be mindful. If you accidentally delete information you didn't mean to, use that Control Z to undo. With merged and centered cells, if I need to adjust the height of a row or the width of a column and it happens to intersect with that range of cells that is merged, you will notice that the merged cell will get larger in addition to that individual column or row.
Get your free one-on-one strategy session scheduled through our Skool platform in the comments below.